On this episode of the podcast interview marketing show, we're going behind the scenes. One of the things that we do with all of our new clients is what we call a walkthrough interview. It's not to go through their content. They already know that. It's really just to go through the best practices, the resources, go through their setup. And today we've got our own Kristen Nolan. Kristen is senior client account manager with us. She's vital in the podcast interview marketing show. And she and some other people on the team are starting to go out into podcast guesting to talk about the power of podcast interview marketing. So this is a walkthrough interview, just like if you were a client. These are the things we'd be talking through. So let's kick it off. Hey, Kristen, how you doing?
Hey, I'm great, Tom. How are you?
Well, I'm feeling underdressed, and before we jumped on here, I went and turned on some different lights. So feedback, your background looks great. Your lighting looks great. I know your microphone, you had said you just set that up. I like how you have, the microphone right there. You've got what I call the not so subtle branding, right? Mic flags are perfect with that. One question I have for you. Are you sure you're coming through that microphone?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
I think so. One of my biggest podcast interviews early on was Darren Bentley, Bigwig Nation. I had just gotten this microphone. And at the end of it, he goes, "So, Tom, what kind of podcast microphone do you have?" And I said, "I've got a Heil PR40. And he's like, "Oh, it doesn't sound like that." And I had rebooted my computer. And in that day, Skype had picked up my internal microphone. And I was so embarrassed. It sounded like I was calling in from a bathroom. So one thing I always recommend people do is just take your thumbnail and just scrape it on there before they start to record. Yep. And say, can you hear that? It's the ultimate mic check. I know for a fact that you're coming through that mic. So that sounds good.
I've set this up a few times and recorded videos for clients only and internal colleagues only to find out that I didn't have the microphone on. And so there was no sound on the video. So
it's like you make those mistakes once in your life and then you learn to check that. Another question. Are you using headphones?
I do not have headphones, but I am getting them. So I know I have them, but they have a built-in microphone. So since I'm using this one, I've ordered some new ones on Amazon and they will be here. But I know that a lot of our clients or a lot of our podcast hosts really want quality headphones so that, you're focused on the conversation. There aren't distractions.
Yeah. And it's not only no distractions, but it's something called feedback. If the sound comes out of the speakers, goes into the microphone, you may not hear it. I may not hear it, but boy, once you get the recording, you can hear that echo and it's almost impossible to get out. Now, what headsets you use is totally up to you. It's personal preference. Some people like just the earbuds. Those work. I like they call them Mickey Mouse ears or cans, right? Keeps my ears warm 6 months out of the year in Michigan. But microphone, you always want to have a dynamic microphone so it doesn't pick up the background noise. But as far as headphones, it's just a personal preference.
I'm going to do the earbuds because I don't want it to mess up my hair on camera, right?
I was going to say, mine, you can't mess it up. Okay. All right. If you're watching, you can tell who is more photogenic, but no matter what, people always judge you by comparisons, right? So if one person's microphone sounds great and the other one sounds lousy, you notice. Same thing with video. So your video here, I'm going to point out a few things. The lighting looks good. The framing looks good, right? You've got a little bit of room above you, the top of your head. It's not getting cut off. Another thing, your head size is about the same as my head size. And it sounds funny, but sometimes you get in there and you're so close to the camera that I look like I've got a big bucket head. So always think of that. So especially if they're repurposing the content, you don't want them to all of a sudden focus on the host for a second and they look normal. And then you as the guest come in and it's like, looks like your nose is touching the camera. It just looks really funny.
Yeah, I've had clients where they're like, they're really close and it looks funny because they want to be really close to the, the microphone. So yeah, a quality microphone will pick you up here.
Yeah. And you didn't pick that up with the dynamic microphone. That is so important. So just the same way you did when you leaned in, it got louder. And so on a dynamic microphone, it's called being in the plane of the microphone. As long as you are where you are now, you're perfect, right? Because at the beginning, they're going to set the voice levels there, but they're not going to do it throughout the entire thing. So if I'm talking and I'm going back and forth or side to side, I don't notice it, but the listeners will. Or I used to be bad if somebody would say, ask me a question about a book. I'd look over in a book stand and, I'd start talking about it. If you're watching the video, it makes complete sense. But if you're just listening to it, it's like, did he just go to get a book? Okay. Now, here's a great tip. Start with the end in mind. When you go on a podcast, before they even hit record, if you want to make sure that your goals get met, here's the way to do it. Just say to the host, like if you is your podcast, Kristen, I'd say, Kristen, I am so happy to be here. I want to bring as much value to you and your audience as possible. What are you hoping to get out of this? What can I do to deliver value? And they're going to tell you exactly what they have in mind. They'll tell you about their audience, everything. They'll tee it up for you. And then most people are nice, right? And they're going to come back and say, well, Kristen, what are you hoping to get out of this? Or even if they don't, you can say, oh, I will definitely do that. Here's what I'm hoping to get out of this. And this is where you can say, I want to share with the audience my book, or I want to talk about how they could use podcast interview marketing. And at this point is a great place to give them the welcome page that you've built and the offers that you're thinking of. So you can say, oh yeah, and I've even built a welcome page. It's back at interviewvalet.com/Kristen Rocks, right? And everything is there, and there's this assessment we have. There's a free copy of a book. There's a discovery call that you can set up. And people will go, oh, thank you. I'll either give you a chance to talk about it at the end, or I'll talk about that. Perfect. All right. So the first question they're going to ask you on every podcast, there's only 2 questions they're going to ask you in the podcast, and I can guarantee each one. And the first one is something like, so Kristen, tell us about yourself. Or Kristen, tell the audience, right? That's not the question they're really asking. And Jeff Barch, he's one of your clients. He did a great episode on this. And really what they're asking, who are you? Why are you here? Why should I listen to you? So think through that before you get on the podcast.
Yeah, one of the things that I really love that Jeff shared is that, it's not an opportunity to, cite off your resume. Really, you're able to connect with the host and the audience in order to build that instant rapport so that they want to learn more and they want to learn about you and what you bring and why it's important to listen to you or continue to listen to you through the episode. And that's what I love. It's that connection.
And sometimes it can even be a statement like, I believe, right? Tell us about yourself. Well, I believe this, and this is the reason I do it because of, my experience, all the rest of that. And at the very beginning, it's sort of like a hook to people of saying, do I believe that? Or that doesn't sound right. Let me listen in a little bit more. And if somebody resonates with you, it pulls them in even more.
Absolutely. I think it's just that instant connection where people can go, you know what, I feel the same way, or I've experienced the same thing. I can relate to that person and I want to get to know what they have to say. I love that.
So if you think through that, you're going to know how to answer the first question on every podcast. Then the last question is going to be something like, so Kristen, any final words? Where can people find out about you? And we both have children, and we should have learned from children. If you give them too many choices, they will just melt down and confuse. So the testing has said, send them to one place, give them 3 ways to say yes: a small yes, a medium yes, and the heck yes. Then remind them again of where they're going. So have you thought through this and different things that you could be talking about at the end there?
Yeah, so I think it really comes down to giving them a reason to visit the site that you're gonna give them, the welcome page, right? What is there? What are they want to go to that page for? What is the purpose and what can they gain from that? So it's not just saying, hey, here's my contact information, find me here. It's go visit me here, learn more. I have, my small yes, my medium yes, and my heck yes. And how can I help you find value in visiting that, and what can I give to the listener?
And, I listened to everybody's first interview, and, oh, please don't say you can come back to the website and sign up for a newsletter, right? Nobody wants another email or newsletter, and you can make it specific, right? We had, I can think of a client. He was an accountant, and he had like a checklist, right? 10 things every should ask themselves about accounting. And if he was on a podcast for manufacturing business, everything a manufacturing business owner should ask. And it was the same 10 questions. Or, everything a dentist should do. It's that whole content is king, but context is God. Now, you have a very calm, reassuring voice, and I'm going to speak to myself on this. When I get excited, I talk faster, faster, and faster. And 70% of podcast interviews are sped up. So if you get excited and talk fast, people won't be able to hear you. And early on, I always talk about this. Danny Bauer from Better Leaders, Better Schools, dear friend, he asked me why I called the company Interview Ballet. And I'm like, no, it's Interview Valet with a V. I said, ballet, that's stupid. And he's like, yeah, I thought so too, but you say it so dang fast. That's what I thought it was. So just slow down. It's the first time. I've never heard of a host saying they talk too slow, but definitely heard they've talked too fast.
And I think even at the end, as you're giving the welcome page, I always advise my clients, make sure that you're spelling it out, especially if you have, a different spelling or something like that. So that way people can actually find you, because you never want to send them to the wrong site and then they can't find you.
Yeah. And even at the end there, I find that's where people speed up. And maybe it's just, growing up on radio where, if you don't get it out, they're going to go to news and weather on the 5s. Just realize that for most podcasts, the vast majority of them, you're not playing beat the clock. So this is the time. If people are still there, they love you, right? If they didn't, they would have turned it off. So you can slow down and use that time to really connect with them. Yeah. So are there any specific questions that you have about being a podcast guest or concerns that you have?
So what are some tips that I could do to just, one of the things that I really love is just connecting with the host and connecting with the audience. So what are things that I could do as a guest to make the host have an even better experience as well? Like, what can I do to be the best podcast guest they've ever had?
Well, if you go in with that mindset or that intention, you're halfway there, right? Because it's like, how can I bring as much value as possible to the audience? And if you just go in there and say, how can I sell as many widgets as possible, it won't work, right? The better you are. Well, I think of DJ Doug Sandler from Nice Guys on Business. He says, don't worry about promoting yourself. If you do a good job, the host will promote you better than you ever could. That even so, be prepared, right? Listen to the interview. Make sure you understand what their style is. I cringe sometimes when I hear people curse and then they're like, oh, can I swear on here? Well, you should have known that before they hit record, right? Um, the pronunciation of their name, right? Marcia, I can't think of her last name now. Oh, that's bad. But she's got a great podcast, and um, people will say like Marcy, M-A-R C-Y. And it's so listen, right, to how they pronounce their name. And, that's part of listening to to them beforehand. Another thing is people love to hear their name. They love to hear the podcast name, right? And when you're going there, the host is a micro influencer. Think about it. People are listening to the podcast for the host, and then they're interested in who the guest is. So make sure you acknowledge them, right? Say their name, say the name of the podcast. And one of the things, you'll have a brief sheet for every podcast, right? On your dashboard as an Interview Valet client, you've got all that. I would recommend pulling that up if you've got two screens, so it's right there. If you don't, or maybe even in addition to that, take a Post-it note, write the host's name and write the podcast name and write the welcome page you're going to send them to. Because inevitably, something in the middle of the podcast, you'll get distracted. Maybe they signed in under their spouse's name, and so instead of, it's saying Tom Schwab, it says Karen Schwab. You don't want to have to think halfway through the podcast, what podcast was this again? Or what's the host's name? Just take that out of there. The final thing I would say is be confident. You've got something to add there, right? What's ordinary to you is amazing to others. But while you're being confident, also be relatable to the audience, right? Telling stories so that they know that you're like them. You've gone through challenges, and most podcasts are audio or are video now, 90% of them, but there's still people that are listening to it. And even if you start throwing out stats, it's not like you've got a chart there. So be less likely to throw out numbers and more to be stories. And the framework that I love for stories comes from Matthew Pollard from The Introvert's Edge. And he says, you say the person's name, right? I had this client, and Carla was a high-level consultant, right? She's an MD, PhD. And if we've got a case study with her, you could always say Carla Fowler, right? If we don't have a case study, maybe you just use their first name. And you say, she was great on podcasts, but she wanted to get the most out of every interview. She just didn't want to do more interviews. She wanted to get more from every interview. So she repurposes these. She cuts them up into videos, slices and dices, and then she puts those up there on her social media. And that's where she gets some great results with it. So tell the name, tell the challenge they had, tell the result they got. And what Matthew talks about is then tie it back to a moral, right? Just sort of this. So this is what that story meant. So what the story meant is just don't do more interviews. Do more with the interviews. If you want to get if you want to get more out of it, be like Carla and repurpose it. So those stories can be very, very powerful.
Yeah, I definitely, I've advised my clients, podcast interviews are not just showing up and recording. There is actually things that go on after. Like with the brief sheet, I always recommend that they find the host through the brief sheet on LinkedIn and connect with them immediately. That way you can see what they're about and they can see you. Once the episode is live, they can tag you on there and they can share it on their LinkedIn or other social media profiles. And so I found that to be really helpful to them. And then also just having those conversations around promotion and repurposing, right? We're not just showing up and, talking, we're actually putting in the work afterwards to make sure that we're maximizing the campaign and maximizing the relationship that you have, right? How nice is it to have a guest that they come in and they're a gracious guest and they're promoting and they're, much like you would have someone come in your home, maybe they write a thank you note, different things like that. So that's what I advise my clients on too.
Awesome. And I'm glad you said that, because podcast guest, right? Drop the podcast word. Think, what does it mean to be a guest? And how you start the interview and how you end it makes all the difference in the world, right? So there are 3 ways to show up on a podcast: early, on time, and rude, right? So if you're there more than 5 minutes early, that's too early. They could have another call going on and then they get popped up there. Anywhere between 5 minutes and 3 minutes before the interview, that's on time, because the host is getting ready and they're thinking, oh, did they remember this? They're under stress. Be there, right? If you're not there, signed into the room 3 minutes before the interview, that's just rude. Especially if it's a live interview. Sometimes they'll simulcast them. You don't want to put somebody, it's like you said, being a dinner guest. If we're serving dinner at 6:30, if you walk in at 6:32 and we're already eating, that's just rude, right? And then afterwards, like you had said, it's great to say, when is this going to go live? Because they probably have their calendar there. And you can always say, when is this going live? Because I want to make sure that I know so I can promote this. They'll love that, right? And as you tell them, hey, I'm going to promote this, they're going to be more excited about promoting it. And then, like you said, I'm amazed how many people don't get thanked after being on a podcast, much less a thank you note. I mean, we do that for our clients, but handwritten thank you notes, those will go a lot further. And, people will say, well, why? This is a micro influencer, right? You wanted to get in front of their audience. Wouldn't you want to have a great relationship? So when they are promoting you, that was they're thinking of great guests, they're thinking of you.
Yeah, I've shared with my clients. I also think that thank you notes help you stand out, right? In a previous position I held, the company was hiring for a CMO, and one day, a package came and the hiring manager had opened it and it was a single Nike shoe. It was brand new, not worn, white, and it had a note and it said, I wanted to put my best foot forward. And so I felt like, even to this day, it's been probably 15 years. I remember who that person was because they figured out a way to stand out. I had another client in the past. He would have a conversation with a host and he would send a personalized book specifically catered to the conversation. It wasn't his book. It was just a book that he felt could be great for personal or professional development for them. And I think that's another way, right? Like, what kind of gift is that we can give to people that we're connecting with, to show them, to take that just a step further, and they will remember those people.
Yeah. And like, we've sent out candles from the Kalamazoo Candle Company, right? Local business. I think the shipping on it costs as much as the candle. I am amazed the number of people that have commented about that years later. Another one, what I'm doing this year, is I'm always saying ordinary to you, amazing to others. And better is better. I'll often ask them, hey, do you have a what's your best mailing address? I'd like to send you a little something, right? So we've mentioned that on the interview. They get it, and it just stays in front of them. And people are like, "Well, that's not scalable." Well, it is, right? Do you want to be efficient or effective? That will help you be effective.
Absolutely. I think just that connection and making yourself memorable, because when I think about it, how many people do podcast hosts interact with on a daily basis? So what is it that you can do to make yourself stand out amongst others that are also, wanting to be guests or vying for their attention? Um,
Yes. What else haven't we touched on that you think is important in a walkthrough interview?
I think just like a, connection, right? Like what is it? And I think we sort of touched on this before, but how do you connect with the host, right? Maybe some people aren't super great at that connection piece. What is your biggest piece of advice to give someone as a guest that, maybe they're not so great at connection? What is something simple that people can do that's, just easy to connect with the audience or the and or the host?
I think at the beginning, setting that intention, right? What are you hoping to get out of this? Because that way you sort of come with the servant heart. One that I'm trying to work on is not answering the question too fast. And um, it can be rude. So if you start asking me a question and I start to answer it before you even finish, it is almost like, oh, I already know the answer to this. And or that I'm just going to talk through my talking points. I think the best guests are the ones that maybe pause for just a split second. Maybe they'll say, "That's an interesting question." And then they'll go into it. Now, I've also seen people that say before every answer, "That's an interesting question." It doesn't sound good there. So I think that can be a way to build rapport with them. I think since this is a discussion, um, often I'll find myself answering a question and I'll forget what the question was. I'll admit. And so sometimes I'll just stop at the end and say, did that answer your question or does that make sense? Right? Because I want to have that discussion there, or I'm trying not to talk too much, right? A conversation means both people talk. And I think if I look back on this recording, because I always listen to my interviews, I bet you it's not a 50-50 split. I guarantee you it's probably 730 my way, 70-30, and that's wrong.
That's great. Great answer. I like it.
And I had mentioned that. Listen to your interviews afterwards. After your first interview, like I said, I'll be listening to it. I'll watch it. I'll give you the feedback, the good, the bad, the ugly, right? There's a lot of people that want you to be happy, right? Your friends and your family always want you to be happy. It's, oh, you were great, right? The true people that love you want you to be better. So amateurs go out there and they just play the game. Professionals play the game and then they watch the film afterwards. So I'd encourage you, after you do your interviews, listen to them, watch them. Just look and say, what did I do well? What did I learn on this one that I can do otherwise? That will help you get so much better by listening to your interviews afterwards.
Absolutely. It's funny that you say that. I had a client share with me and he had his own podcast. He's done a ton of podcasts and he was like, I asked him for feedback on a podcast and I said, how did it go? And he said, I'll be really honest with you. Like I got thrown a curveball and it made me, it made me more aware that I need to be more versed in being given curveball sort of questions and be prepared. Cause I think he got into a situation where he was feeling, really confident and, he was thrown a curveball and he was like, okay. So he had to just kind of take a minute and, get the answer that he wanted to have for that. But, we're always learning and growing and developing. And so I think it's really important to do, as you said, and just go back and listen and be open to feedback, right? Like the people that know us the best. Like I will often ask my husband, hey, what do you think of this? Like whether it's writing or whatever, and he'll give me, feedback. So I think it's important to have people around you that are able and willing to provide feedback. And I try to do that for my clients, right? So I'll go back and listen to podcasts
Mhm.
and I'll say, hey, you did X, Y, and Z really great, but you didn't share the welcome page. So, people don't know where to find you. And so it's really important that you surround yourself with people that are willing and able to just, continue to make you better.
Yeah, and you had mentioned uh, uh, a crazy question or something that you hadn't thought about. It's going to happen. I don't care how well prepared you are. And one of the things that I've learned from clients on that is if it's a question that I would call a stupid question, right? We had one client that uh, great, great guy. He went to Wharton Business School and he wrote a book on how families can uh, can run their family based on what he learned in business school. And he's on Wall Street and somebody asked him a stupid question was, you know, do you have any stock picks? And he reframed it very well and he said, that's a question that I get asked often. Sort of saying, oh, it's not a stupid question. I get asked often. But by the time I know it, the information's old. By the time I tell you, it's even older. By the time this goes live, it will be history. So I like to always focus on the big picture, the fundamentals. So he was able to rephrase that and sort of answer the question he wanted to. Another one is sometimes I'll get asked a question. It's like, I've never thought about that. And I try to be honest with that and just say, I've never been asked that. I don't know that I've even thought through that answer. So if you don't mind, I'll just do that now. And so I'll start thinking through it. And that way it buys yourself a little bit of time. And it's not like I'm saying, oh, this is the answer. 1, 2, 3.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to give any, like, you want a well thought out answer. You don't just want to, off the cuff say something that, maybe you hadn't thought through or maybe don't mean either. I like that.
Well, Kristen, you're going to be awesome on podcast. Thank you for letting us record your walkthrough interview here. Like I said, I'll listen to your first interview, give you feedback. I know you're going to be great.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I've had fun.
Thanks, everybody.